Yeah, that's my favorite thing. When the video's done, but then it just keeps playing and you're like, oh my gosh, again, again, again. All right, so today we are going to be doing most of our conversation in our small groups and our squads. So sixth graders are kind of all over here in this section. So how about all of our sixth graders get right here, along with your leaders. And then our seventh graders are going to be right here. Yeah, seventh graders. And then our eighth graders will be right here. So get in your squads, get with your people, because today a lot of your discussion is going to be just with your peeps. So make sure you get close to your leaders, make sure they can hear you and understand you. Where are Benny and Quinn? Okay, all right, so right now Kyle is running all sixth graders. Wah! The mighty Kyle. The Kyle. Oh, wait, King Kyle. That's one of his nicknames. King Kyle! Okay, guys, so I have a question for you. What is an origin story? What is an origin story? Braxton? Yeah, a story behind someone in their past, how they got to be who they are. So, they're making a lot of movies right now about origin stories. How many of you guys saw Wonka? Yeah, so that's an origin story for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, or even Cruella, which is like, 101 Dalmatians, or even Iron Man 1. It's a great origin story. It's so good. So in your squads, I want you guys to talk about your favorite origin story and why you like it so much. So talk amongst yourselves, your favorite origin story and why it's your favorite. All right, guys, what are some of your favorite origin stories that were brought up in your class? Also, eighth graders, y'all should not be sitting so far apart. Get grouped together. Good Lord. No, it's okay. You guys scoot closer together. She'll move. Scoot, scoot. It looks weird. You're okay. So some of your favorite origin stories. Okay. What is it? The songs? Okay. Well, it was good? You enjoyed it? Okay. I might have to check that out. What else, guys? Other origin stories you've really enjoyed? Isaac. Batman, the Dark Knight. Ugh. Very dark. And emphasis on dark. The entire TV, you can't even see it. It's so dark. Yes. Yes, senor. Don't know what that is? Okay, he has an origin story? Okay, good to know. All right, sixth grade squad, we're going to need to divide into little smaller groups. So, Quinn, you can take maybe half the people to this section if you want. All right, any other origin stories you like? Caleb? Ford versus Ferrari? Oh, I heard that was a good one. You would like an origin story about cars. If you don't know anything about Caleb, the only thing you need to know is the man loves cars and already has his own. All right, maybe one more from the seventh grade section. An origin story you guys like? King Josiah? Because he's your name. It makes sense. It makes sense. All right, guys. So we are talking about origin stories because the sermon series we're in is all about our origin. Because the first book of the Bible, what's the first book of the Bible called? Genesis. And its literal translation is origin, otherwise known as the beginning, which Morgan's or our slide person has gone too far. You can go back. But we are talking about the origins of everything that exists. And that's super important because if you don't know the beginning, you don't know the origin. By the time you get to the end, you're like, how on earth did we get here? What's going on? So that's why we're talking about it. And 2 weeks ago, Andrew started off our series on the beginning, on our origins, by talking about Genesis chapters 1 and 2. What happened in Genesis chapters 1 and 2? Yes, Leilani? They made the world, yeah. What else happened in Genesis chapters 1 and 2? Close, but not quite. Cooper. Dirt. Yeah, so he made everything. He made people. He also made one command, one rule, and then set them loose. But tonight we are talking about Genesis 3 and 4, which is technically when sin enters the world. But if you're in any kind of church circle, it's more commonly known as, Brogan already spoiled it, the fall. And so we're going to talk about why this is called the fall, what happened, and what its connotations are in our life. Good Lord. So, how many of you feel like you really know the story of Adam and Eve? You're like, I got this down. I know it. I understand it. Okay. So what I'm going to have you do is I'm not going to tell it. You guys are going to teach it in your squad. So pick one person in your squad, pretend like they're the teacher, and they're going to teach it to your squad. Genesis chapters 1, verse 3, 1 through 7. And if anybody leaves anything out, you can explain at the end. But make sure you're thorough. Make sure you're thorough, okay? Allowed to tell the story. Somebody else has to. Got like 30 more seconds. Liam, you should go with this group. What? Ian, sorry. All right. You got 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Cease your teaching. Cease it. How many of you feel like you did a good job? You did a good job explaining it. You feel like everybody knows what's going on. All right, I have a couple questions. For you to make sure your teacher did a good job. All right. Who approached the woman by the tree? Who was it? Braxton. The serpent. 1 point for the 7th graders. All right. Where was the what was happening? Where was the homeboy? Yes, Wyatt? He was, they were both in the garden. Was he? Josiah? Yeah. Actually, sorry, the 6th graders hopped in. He was right there. Adam was right there, right next to Eve, being really quiet. Oh, yeah. Oh, look. Ta-da! And then my last question. What was the one rule God had given the man and the woman? Let's see here. So we already have the 8th graders. Your turn. Cooper. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they could do anything they wanted, but they couldn't eat from the one tree in the center of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. All right, I feel like you guys got a pretty good grasp of what happens. This story is all over nursery walls everywhere in the church, which is a weird story to paint on the walls because it's 2 naked people and a snake. It's kind of weird. But I actually have 2 questions that I want you to delve deeper into this story to talk about in your squads. So the first question is, what changed in the relationship between God and humans in this story that we just talked about? You can put that question up on the screen there, Morgan. He wasn't supposed to be running it today. Nope. There should be a question before. Are you in the high school PowerPoint or the middle school PowerPoint? Or there should be one before this with 2 questions. what changed in the relationship between God and humans, and why is this called the fall? Go back one. Oh, perfect. All right, I'll come check it out. But you guys can answer these two questions. What changed in the relationship between God and humans? There are three distinct things, just so you know. And then why do you think this is called the fall? Go. Do you guys need some more time? You guys figured it out? Figured it out? Okay. Well, we're just going to move forward and see what happens then, eh? So, what changed in the relationship between God and humans? There were three things that happened right after they took the fruit and ate it, which is the one thing God told them they couldn't do. What were three things that happened? Josie. Okay, yeah, so that's true. But before that, so before God came down and there was curses upon the three parties involved, before that, what were three things that happened? What changed between God and humans? Ian. Yep, well, one, yeah, they were naked. Ah, they figured it out. What else? There were two other things that happened. So right after they figured out they were naked, what did they do? Quentin. They were ashamed, and then what did they do? They felt bad? They hid from God. Oh, okay, I'll give it to the 8th graders. And then the last thing, they hid from God, then God came down and he's like, what happened? And then what did they do? They lied about it, but by doing what? How specifically did they lie? They blamed each other. Perfect. Put up the 3, Morgan. They felt shame, they hid, and they started blaming everybody else. So we're going to kind of look at these 3. So the first thing is shame. They realized they were naked. How many of you guys remember the first time you realized you were naked? Anybody remember that day? I was 3 years old. Do you remember that? Where you woke up and you're like, oh my gosh, I need to put on clothes. You don't remember that day? No? Okay, well, do you remember this day? The day when you're showering and your mom comes into the bathroom and you're like, get out of the bathroom, Mom, I'm showering, I'm naked. And she's like, and what does your mom say at that point? Yeah, I saw you naked. I birthed you. It's not weird. And you're like, no, Mom, it's weird. Get out of the shower. It's odd. So but I want you to think about something. Were Adam and Eve naked before they ate the apple or whatever fruit it was? Yes, they were naked. Was it weird? Was there anything wrong with the way God made them? No. So after they disobeyed God, something changed, where all of a sudden they no longer believed that how God made them was good enough. All of a sudden, they didn't believe that God was enough, and they had to add to what God had made in order to feel like they were worthy to be in his presence, to be alive. All of a sudden, what God had made wasn't good enough. And the second thing they did is they hid. Do you have a place in your house where you hide when you did something wrong, you don't want to get in trouble, so you always go there because your parents can never find you? I was like, no, my parents built my house. They know exactly where I am. Like, maybe mine was my closet. I would hide in the back of it and be like, my mom and dad will never find me back here. I had a closet back in the day. But you see, before they disobeyed God, God would come down and they'd walk together and they'd chat and it was awesome. But then they ate the fruit and all of a sudden they're like, man, God isn't going to accept us anymore. God isn't going to love us. We've crossed the line. He won't forgive us. So we need to hide. Whatever I've done, God cannot see. This is no longer okay. And their perfect, vulnerable, open relationship was broken. And then finally, they started blaming everybody else. Yeah. So speaking of hiding in my closet, one time my mom made us a cake. I don't know how old we were, 5 years old. She frosted it, put it on the counter, and my sister and I took it into our hiding place, our closet, licked all the frosting off, and then put it back, thinking she wouldn't notice, thinking that she would forget that she frosted it. And she's like, hey guys, like what happened to the frosting? And we're like covered in frosting, and we're like, I don't know, Mom, I don't think you frosted it. It's your fault, there's no frosting on it. And she's like, yeah, okay. And then we got swatted. So we're blaming everybody else. We're like, Mom, it's your fault. You don't remember? You put frosting on the cake? But you see, when we were created, we were supposed to show God's image. We were supposed to show selfishness and be like, dude, this is about God. And then after the fall, it became all about us. What we need and what we can do. And we're even willing to hurt other people so then it doesn't look like we're not okay. And so those were three things that happened right after the fall. And so it's called the fall because in a sense, humanity fell from heaven that day. And then now we needed a way to get back. And so there's a verse in Romans 5. You can put that up on the screen. I think we have Romans 5:12. There it is. Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people because all sinned. And that's what happened at the fall. And so there's one main point I want you guys to take away from tonight, which I hate this microphone, but that's all right. Do you have the slide that says sin is real, Morgan? Aha! So I want you guys to take this away. Sin is real, and it tries to separate you from God every day in the same ways it separated the man and the woman from him. That's the main thing I want you guys to kind of take away. And so in your squad, I want you to answer these three questions, which are off of the three ways that Adam and Eve's relationship with God changed. Do you have those three, Morgan? It says, it's like shame, hiding, and placing blame on other people. What's the next slide? Dang it. Yeah, that's the high school PowerPoint. All right, I'll have to fix that. But so the three questions is, do you try to be good enough for God? And if so, how? And then the second one is there anything you think that God can't forgive? And why? And then, is it hard for you to own up to your own mistakes? And why? So if you're a group leader, you can come take a picture of these three questions, and then you can talk about it in your squads. All right, you guys have like another minute or so. So finish up your conversation, then we're going to move on. All right, finish up your thoughts. We're going to move on. All right, guys, focus on me. Focus on me. We're going to move back in. Eyes on me. Levi, let me see your eyes. Yep. All right. Yep, I can. I can. All right, cool. So, we just finished Genesis chapter 3. So, sin happened, the fall happened. There were these three main ways that that sin affected humanity, things that we can even see in our own lives, and then all of a sudden, like chapter 3 is just over and you're like, okay, like what are we supposed to do now? And then chapter 4 happens. And a lot of times we avoid chapter 4 because we're like, oh, you know, or let's just skip on to a new book. But what we're about to cover is super, super important. How many of you guys know the story of Cain and Abel? All right, a little bit, yeah, because typically we skip over it because we're like, oh, Adam and Eve, and then Noah, and like, anything else happen in between? I don't know. So we're going to do the same thing that you guys did with Adam and Eve. I want you to teach your squad the story of Cain and Abel. It's not very long. I'm pretty sure we have a slide for this. It's Genesis chapter 4, verses like 1 through 8. So teach your squad the story of Cain and Abel really quick. I like to call it the second sin, and then we're going to move on and then close her up. So pick somebody from your squad to teach everyone else the story of Cain and Abel. Go. And how about you give the quick recap for them? All right, guys. All right, guys, you got 30 seconds. 30 seconds, then we're going to move on. All right, guys, look up at me. Look up at me. We're going to finish up today. All eyes on me. All right, so we just finished Cain and Abel. Everybody feels like you kind of understand what happened. You got the basic premise. The 6th grade group over here who couldn't find Genesis. You guys got it, though? You guys got it? All right, cool. Oh, wow. All right, so basic idea, 2 brothers. They both bring a sacrifice. God likes one sacrifice and not the other. For various reasons, potentially, the text isn't super clear about necessarily why. Like maybe Cain's sacrifice sucked and Abel's was better, but the sacrificial system wasn't in place yet. Like how are they supposed to know? But God just didn't like Cain's, and he liked Abel's. And Cain got really, really angry. It almost seems a little obnoxious. So my first question I want you guys to think about is, why do you think Cain was so angry because of this? Shout it out. Why do you guys think Cain was angry? Yeah, so Abel was favored over Cain. What was that, Quentin? Abel. Okay, guess. That Cain was humiliated? Yeah, so Abel was a sheeper. Cain brought plants. And remember, so if Cain was a farmer, what was just cursed the chapter prior? The soil. How cool is that? Leilani? He didn't feel good enough. So actually, you guys brought up, Josiah and Leilani brought up the point that I wanted to bring up, is actually we might have the verse up on the screen, but Cain was super angry. And God actually tells Cain why he was angry. In verse 7, he says, if you do what is right, won't you be accepted? Cain didn't feel accepted by God. He didn't feel like he was good enough. Do you remember anyone recently we just met who didn't feel like they were good enough for God? Who? Who? Adam and Eve, his parents. So that original sin is creeping back in, and he's like, man, I don't feel like I'm good enough. And the reason why I'm not good enough is because of who? Is because of my brother Abel. And so he began to place blame on his brother. So all these things, everything from Genesis chapter 3 is showing up in Genesis chapter 4. It's as if sin is just showing up everywhere. And then what does God do? Does God get angry? Does God send lightning? What does God do when Cain gets angry? Braxton. That's right, Josiah. He talks to him about it. How does he talk to him about it? No, it says that he spoke to him. Even after the fall, God showed up and spoke to Cain. And he said, yeah, I didn't like your sacrifice. But guess what? Your sacrifice doesn't matter because it's not your identity. Your sacrifice doesn't make me love you or not. I love you because you're made in my image. And you need to know that that's enough. So don't be like your parents who thought they had to do more and they had to be better and they're hiding from me and they're blaming other people. Like, just know that I love you and it's going to be okay. Don't open the door to sin. But what did Cain do? He opened the door to sin and killed his brother. So what's kind of interesting here is that the first 4 people alive were not able to overcome sin. Yeah, but he died. The first 4 people weren't able to overcome sin. And so I want us to look at a verse here, guys, and then I want you to talk about the verse in your squads. So it's in Romans, again, chapter 5. So I want you guys to check this out. So Adam's one sin brings condemnation for everyone, but Christ's one act of righteousness brings a right relationship with God and new life for everyone. Because one person disobeyed God, many became sinners. But because one other person obeyed God, many will be made righteous. So I want you guys to talk in your squads about what the heck this verse means. Go. About 30 more seconds. All right, guys, eyes on me. Eyes on me. If you guys want a life verse, if anyone ever asks you, like, what's my life verse? What verse should I put on my Instagram bio? Be this one. So you can write this down, and when people think you're cool, you can thank me later. But this verse right here is why Jesus' death on the cross in 33 AD was so significant. Because the first two people alive got knocked down by sin. The next two people got knocked down by sin either because they were the sinner or they committed the sin. And then every single person after was knocked down by sin, afraid they weren't enough, hiding, blaming other people, cycle. And then Jesus happened. And Jesus was the first person to show that sin can actually be defeated. Sin can be overcome. And so when we follow Jesus, not only are we made right with God, but also he gives us the same power to overcome sin that he had, the Holy Spirit. Adam and Eve didn't have the Holy Spirit, and they couldn't do it. Cain and Abel didn't have the Holy Spirit. They couldn't do it. But Jesus did, and we do, so we can overcome sin. And so because of Adam, we hide from God. We feel like we aren't enough. We won't hold up to our sins and our issues, and we hide, and we're like, man, it's not okay, and we run from God. But because of Jesus, we can say, no, I can overcome the sin in my life by the power of God. And I don't have to be separated from God. I don't have to let Genesis 3 and Genesis 4 be my life story. My life story can be Romans chapter 5. And you can do what Cain wasn't able to do, what Adam and Eve weren't able to do, which is trust God and not let sin control you. So we are actually going to close out by you guys praying with each other in your groups. So you could take some prayer requests, but we have like 2 or 3 minutes, and just pray for each other that the things we talked about, like, do you ever feel like you aren't enough or not able to own up to your mistakes, or sometimes you hide from God? Just pray for each other for that. and then we'll have the host come up to end the service. So take a few minutes to pray.